welcome to the program. Today, Russia agrees to a new 12-hour ceasefire to allow civilians to flee 6 of the worst affected areas in Ukraine. Ukraine's president says no-fly zone is needed to avert humanitarian catastrophe. And Britain's defense minister says the country is exploring donating anti-air missiles to Ukraine. Again, a warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thanks for joining us on our second hour of coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Let's bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the last couple of hours. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been answering questions in Parliament, many of them focused on the situation in Ukraine, including the energy consequences in the UK and support for refugees fleeing the Russian invasion. Now, let me unbundle that for you. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Vidam Pestiako, spoke to Parliament earlier, urging the country's lawmakers to drop visa rules for a limited time to allow refugees to get out of his country faster. He says over 7 million people have now been displaced as a result of the war in Russia and in Ukraine, and insists that few Ukrainians will want to move away from their natural home near Slavic tribes in Eastern Europe, and the government hopes to welcome them home soon to rebuild. Prime Minister Johnson says almost 1,000 Ukrainians have been granted visas to come to the UK already, and the numbers should rise sharply. He has been accused by the SNP of leading a government with the slowest and most incompetent refugee responses in Europe. In the meantime, Mr. Johnson's Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has announced the UK is increasing its supply of weapons to Ukraine to defend itself. Britain has already delivered 2,000 anti-tank missiles and NLAW, which stands for Next Generation Light Anti-Tank Weapons. Now, Mr. Wallace says the number is being increased to over 3,000. Now, global leaders are invested in this all-important talks expected to hold between Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, in Turkey. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has been acting as an intermediary, flying to Moscow to meet Russian President on Saturday and also speaking on the phone with him and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, finally, Ukraine's state-run nuclear company says that electricity supplies to the former power plants at Chernobyl have been cut and has warned that radioactive substances could be released because spent nuclear fuel cannot be cooled. Caught up enough. Day 14 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been about the evacuations taking place in 6 major Ukrainian cities. Bear in mind, Nigerians in Sumy have finally left. They left yesterday on buses and are en route to the Hungarian border. Russia today agreed a new 12-hour ceasefire to allow civilians to flee. This was confirmed by Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister. Here's more in this report.
Within the small window of opportunity to flee Ukraine without hearing bombs going off, thousands make their way across various borders from Ukraine. At Medyka, a border town close to the Ukrainian border with Poland, Polish soldiers and volunteers help people onto trains. Families with young children and elderly people carrying suitcases and wearing winter coats board trains specifically for refugees. Poland has received more than 1.3 million people since the war began on February 24. At the Siret border crossing near Romania, refugees carrying backpacks and dragging suitcases, some carrying pets, are received by firefighters and volunteers and helped onto buses at the border crossing point. First responders have also been handing out supplies. Dozens more arrive by ferry at the Romanian port of Isasir. Fleeing families stop over to continue their journeys through Europe in search of refuge outside of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky, during his broadcast this morning, once again called on the international community to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, saying that's the international community, would be responsible for a mass humanitarian catastrophe if it did not do so. He said the threat level in Ukraine was at a maximum nearly 2 weeks into the Russian invasion, but that Ukrainians have shown they would never give in. Ukraine has pleaded with Western nations provided with fighter jets to counter Russia's invasion, which has forced more than 2 million refugees to flee the country. U.S. lawmakers have responded by pushing President Joe Biden's administration to facilitate the transfer of aircrafts. And while Russia's defense ministry has released a video showing a military column on the move outside Ukraine, it also says over 120 tons of humanitarian aid from the country's Tula region have been delivered to residents in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. Among the humanitarian aid are food, drinking water, medicines, clothes and beddings. Shipped to Kharkiv under the escort of Russian troops, the aid is mainly for women and children and the seniors. On the sidelines, Russia has demanded that the United States explain to the world why it supported what Moscow calls a military biological program in Ukraine involving deadly pathogens, including plague and anthrax. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova demanded transparency from Washington over the allegation, which is denied by Kyiv and which a Pentagon spokesperson has described as absurd. She said evidence of the alleged program had been uncovered by Russia during what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine. Zakharova said Russia had documents showing that the Ukrainian Health Ministry had ordered the destruction of samples of plague, cholera, anthrax and other pathogens after February 24. China, Russia's ally, says US-led NATO has pushed the conflicts between Russia and Ukraine to the volcanic crater step by step. Addressing a press conference, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian says the U.S. government in recent days spread false information against China incessantly on the Ukraine issue, attempting to transfer the conflicts, provoke confrontations, and reap gains by doing so. Amid growing Western sanctions on Russia, President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday signed a decree introducing special economic measures to ensure Russia's security in the field of foreign trade. Putin instructed the government to draw up within 2 days a list of commodities and raw materials banned from export and import. The ban will be in effect until December 31st, according to the decree.
Well, in the meantime, leaders of U.S. spy agencies say that Russian President Vladimir Putin may intensify assault on Ukraine despite military setbacks and economic hardships resulting from international sanctions. They estimate that 2,000 to 4,000 Russian troops have died so far. According to Russia, it's also feeling the effect of sanctions, but the situation could become much worse for Ukrainians, with food and water supplies in Kyiv possibly running out within 2 weeks.
Including global health security. Russia's failure to rapidly seize Kyiv and overwhelm Ukrainian forces has deprived Moscow of the quick military victory that it probably had originally expected would prevent the United States and NATO from being able to provide meaningful military aid to Ukraine. Moreover, we assess Moscow underestimated the strength of Ukraine's resistance and the degree of internal military challenges we are observing, which include an ill-constructed plan, morale issues, and considerable logistical issues. In particular, while Putin probably anticipated many of the current sanctions to be imposed when he weighed the cost of the invasion, we judge that he did not anticipate either the degree to which the United States and its allies and partners would take steps to undermine his capacity to mitigate Western actions, or the pullback from Russia initiated by non-state actors in the private sector. And nevertheless, our analysts assess that Putin is unlikely to be deterred by such setbacks and instead may escalate, essentially doubling down to achieve Ukrainian disarmament and neutrality to prevent it from further integrating with the US and NATO if it doesn't reach some diplomatic negotiation. We assess Putin feels aggrieved the West does not give him proper deference and perceives this as a war he cannot afford to lose. But what he might be willing to accept as a victory may change over time given the significant costs he is incurring. Putin's nuclear saber rattling is very much in line with this assessment. Putin's public announcement that he ordered Russia's strategic nuclear forces to go on special alert in response to aggressive statements, as he called them, from NATO leaders was extremely unusual. We have not seen a public announcement from the Russians regarding a heightened nuclear alert status since the 1960s, but we also have not observed force-wide nuclear posture changes that go beyond what we have seen in prior moments of heightened tensions during the last few decades. Our analysts assess that Putin's current posturing in this arena is probably intended to deter the West from providing additional support to Ukraine as he weighs an escalation of the conflict. Putin probably still remains confident that Russia can militarily defeat Ukraine and wants to prevent Western support from tipping the balance and forcing a conflict with NATO. And regardless, our number one intelligence priority is defense of the homeland, and we will remain vigilant in monitoring every aspect of Russia's strategic nuclear forces. With tensions this high, there is always an enhanced potential for miscalculation, unintended escalation, which we hope our intelligence can help to mitigate.
Staying with the U.S., Vice President Kamala Harris is headed for Poland and Romania for talks on the crisis in Ukraine. She's scheduled to meet the leaders of both countries to coordinate on their response to Russia's military operation in Ukraine and discuss how the U.S. can further support Ukraine's neighboring nations. The trip is the second time in a month that Harris has been dispatched to Europe as the Biden administration seeks to rally international support behind its efforts to isolate and punish Russia for the war in Ukraine. However, what seemed like a straightforward mission with high stakes turned more fraught when the Polish Foreign Ministry announced on Tuesday it was prepared to deploy the jets to the U.S. Air Force's Ramstein Air Base in Germany, which in theory could then be provided to Ukraine. The VOA's White House correspondent Anita Powell joins us now on the program. Hello, Anita. Let's begin with VP Harris, which we're hearing, her trip now seems complicated after Poland caught the U.S. by surprise with a proposal to provide its Soviet-era fighter jets to Ukraine. Speak to us about that.
Right. So this is a very complicated and nuanced issue. And when asked about it yesterday, White House Press Secretary he noted that it's not a matter of just booking jets to a country. You have to consider what airports they're leaving from and what airports they're landing at, and that has legal implications. It could be seen, for example, if jets were to leave from an airfield in Warsaw and land in an airfield in Kiev, which may not even be possible, that seen as a declaration of war from a NATO member? And if a NATO member gets embroiled in this conflict, then all NATO members have to get embroiled in this conflict. So this is a very sensitive, delicate discussion that's not anywhere near as straightforward as some critics are making it seem.
But is the U.S. dismissing this, or they are looking at the possibility of going with that decision?
I think time will tell, and I think that is part of what the vice president will be discussing on this trip. So I think it might be a bit too soon to say what's going to happen there, but I think that we will get more clarity on that shortly.
The trip is also the second time in the month that Harris is heading to Europe. What else could be on that agenda? Is she likely to meet with Russia on ceasefire talks with Ukraine?
So I'm just looking at the White House readout. They gave us some information about this late last night. And this trip, she's going to collaborate with NATO allies on the eastern flank to talk about how to respond to Russian aggression. So she's going to be meeting with the Polish president, the Polish prime minister, the Canadian prime minister, who, as you may notice, has been doing the rounds in Europe this week himself. And she's also going to assess the humanitarian situation, talk to people who fled from Ukraine. So this is a multifaceted trip with many foci, I guess you could say. And then in Romania, for example, she's going to meet with embassy staff there and with also the president of Romania to talk about some of the issues that are on the table. But this is a rapidly evolving situation. And so I think the focus of her trip will also evolve.
So I know you mentioned something about meeting with, allies, NATO. There's also, of course, what has been happening, and this is neighboring countries to Ukraine who are solidifying their military and all of that. Is there word of any significant threat, and this is Russia going beyond Ukraine to attack neighboring countries in Europe?
Well, we just heard those very sobering, worrying intelligence assessments from the U.S. Director of National Intelligence. And let me just note that U.S. intelligence leading up to this invasion has been startlingly accurate. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously there's concern. The U.S. does believe that President Putin's ambitions extend far beyond Ukraine, and who knows where they end. That's the unknown, I suppose. But yeah, obviously the Eastern Flank NATO allies, the countries of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, Poland, are very concerned right now about where this could take him, and preparing for that. And they've drawn a firm line in the sand, which is we will defend every inch of NATO territory. But until and unless, so far, Russian troops enter into that space, they're kind of sitting there watching with concern, and I think we could safely say horror when we look at the number of refugees, women and children who have fled.
Been displaced,
Ukraine.
yes, indeed. Anita, also, if we come back to Ukraine, last night we also heard US officials saying that Russia may intensify attacks in the coming days. Are there any plans in place or talks about more support from the US for Ukraine?
Well, the U.S. President Joe Biden, has already asked Congress to approve a $12 billion humanitarian package. And that's in addition to military support, which the U.S. has been providing to Ukraine's army. But so right now we're kind of sitting on this $12 billion humanitarian relief package to the people of Ukraine, which is, I think, the biggest move on the table right now from the U.S.
Talk to us about another issue that appears to be making headlines today. Russia demanding the U.S. to explain alleged biolabs with anthrax was a plague in Ukraine. How is the White House responding to this, and what more can you tell us about the allegations?
So far this morning, we haven't gotten a response from the White House on this, and I will reserve my analysis of this until I hear from them and see what they have to say, because that's a hefty allegation, and it's in line with what I suppose the Russian media machine, the misinformation machine, has been churning out. It's likely that the White House will say, because they have warned us before about the perils of Russian misinformation and these sort of pressure campaigns that the Russian government is putting out. But it's too soon to say exactly what the White House is going to say about that.
All right, many thanks, VOA's White House correspondent Anita Powell. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says there's no sense in a military solution to the Ukraine conflict, and he hopes instead that a solution could be found in talks between Russia and Ukraine. Speaking at a joint news conference with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he said Germany will certainly not send warplanes to Ukraine. On his part, Canadian Prime Minister promised an additional $50 million worth of equipment to be sent to Ukraine soon.
Canada and Germany stand together against Putin's invasion. He represents a threat to democracy, to security, and to peace in Europe and around the world. This morning I spoke with President Zelensky and highlighted once again the strength and determination of the Ukrainian people, and told him that Canada will soon be sending highly specialized equipment to them, and invited him to address Parliament in Canada. And he accepted. I can announce an additional $50 million worth of equipment that we will be sending towards Ukraine to help out. We will continue to send equipment and weapons as needed, as we have in Canada. We will continue to be aligned with our partners. We all have to be careful about not further expanding or escalating. We want to de-escalate the conflict. We want to see an end to this conflict. We will be there to support Ukrainians in every way that we can, but we need to be mindful of the best way to support them.
You're watching Channels Television, and our coverage of the Russian invasion in Ukraine is still ahead. The International Energy Agency says it's ready to bring more oil to the markets by releasing additional stocks as Western countries and energy imports from Russia. Welcome back. Let's switch focus to sanctions on Russia now. Britain says it has impounded a plane connected to a Russian billionaire under new aviation sanctions, which gives authorities the power to detain any Russian aircraft and to ban exports of aviation or space-related goods to Russia. The measures to strengthen action against Russian aircraft means it is a criminal offence for any to fly or land in the United Kingdom. The ban includes any aircraft owned, operated or chartered by anyone connected with Russia or designated individuals or entities, and will include the power to detain any aircraft owned by persons connected with Russia.
Already on the very, very first day of this invasion, Thursday, 2 weeks ago, banned Aeroflot, banned commercial airlines. The following day, banned private jets as well. So they were already not allowed. However, there were potential loopholes, and I also wanted to make the issue a criminal one. So last night, I also signed a law which closes off some of those loopholes to do with trying to work out the ownership of some of these aircraft. There is one such aircraft on the ground at the moment at Farnborough that I've essentially impounded whilst we carry out further investigations for the last few days. And it's very important that we have the laws available to enable that to happen. 760, and I was going to go on to say that anyone who's seen the pictures on television, our heart goes out. We want to support, and we're doing that in close coordination with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, who want to, broadly speaking, keep people as close to Ukraine as possible. But we've got some very large visa schemes coming into place with very large numbers. And of course, people would expect us to make sure that we know exactly who's coming to the country, which is why the process takes a little bit of time.
And following the announcement of bans on Russian oil by the US and UK, the International Energy Agency says it is ready to bring more oil to the markets by releasing additional stocks. Head of the IEA says, Fatih Barrel, says the agency will also come up with an action plan to reduce oil in a hurry. Oil prices rocketed higher after Russia, the world's second largest crude exporter, invaded Ukraine, and the West toughened sanctions on Moscow, stoking fears of supply disruptions to an already tight market. The US and UK ban on Russian oil and the EU ending its reliance on Russian gas is all part of their promise to step up the economic response to the invasion of Ukraine. US President Joe Biden said the move targeted the main artery of Russia's economy. Energy exports are a vital source of revenue for Russia, but the move is also likely to impact Western consumers. Major brands have, meanwhile, continued to pull out of Russia, with McDonald's and Coca-Cola the latest to leave. Russia's economy is heavily dependent on energy. It is the world's third biggest oil producer, behind Saudi Arabia and the United States. For more on what all this means, we have joining us on the program Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, CEO of the CFG Advisory. He's also an investment banker and economist. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Let's begin with the ban by the United States. What will it mean for oil and gas prices?
Well, as you can see, oil and gas prices are already over $100 a barrel, and traders are now expecting that within the next month or so, if the hostilities continue the way they are, and as the sanctions are beginning to bite, we could see oil at an all-time high of about close to $200 a barrel.
In terms of this, what does this also do to Russia's economy? Some have said that Russia might not lose much if prices rise to over $200 a barrel. Do you think this would in any way affect Russia's income reserves, even though some people say, yes, this is part of what is being used to fight the invasion in Ukraine?
Well, don't forget that Russia is fully integrated into the global economy. Even though the Russians might have a different ideology, they're part of a world and a global economic order. And as you can see, there have been significant amounts of foreign direct investments by Western companies into Russia over the years. The big oil companies are present in Russia and are exploiting Russian oil resources. There's that massive gas pipeline two pipelines, as a matter of fact, going in from Russia into Western Europe, which is causing a bit of a problem now in terms of energy security. So Russia is interdependent with the global economy, and these sanctions, of course, are going to hurt Russia, as well as they're going to hurt the West and the rest of the world. What you're seeing now is that there's been a shift, and Russia is now trying to form a trading bloc with China and India, and taking trying to look at alternative means of trying to exploit its resources. But all these other economies, for instance, China, most of China's exports are to the United States, and the Chinese government is holding the highest levels of U.S. Treasury reserves in the world. So there's a lot of interdependence, and China is going to tread very carefully to ensure that it doesn't upset both the United States and Russia.
So in your assessment, will this hurt Russia in any way? Because, I mean, after the latest ban of the US, critics of Russia said that sanctioning its energy exports will be the best, perhaps the only way to force Moscow to pull back.
Yes, it's going to hurt Russia, definitely, although they build up huge foreign reserves. It's not sure whether they're going to be operating at an alternative level with cryptocurrency. But eventually, their biggest exports are oil and gas. And Europe needs the gas, the US needs the oil. But now that the US is going on the oil and, damning the consequences, it is going to hurt them on the long run. There's no doubt about that. But then it's a zero-sum game in the sense that the rest of the world is now looking at $200 a barrel for the price of oil. And of course, the impact of that is inflationary. You do understand that we were just coming out of this forced recession as a result of COVID and the lockdown. And that recovery was fueling inflation, which was expected. And globally, you could see that inflation was high. And of course, the central banks responded by increasing interest rates. So the cost of borrowing and price levels, consumer price indexes were going quite high. Now you impact that with the war, which the direct consequence is a high rise in the cost of energy. And energy is a very important input across the globe. All the transportation, logistics, all these costs are going to be transferred eventually to the consumers. So this war is going to cause a massive inflation across the globe, and it's going to hurt all the global economies. And if we're not careful, it might lead us into another recession.
And the EU is part of that global economy. And on the other hand, they're planning to phase all energy imports by the end of the year, meaning that for now there is that heavy reliance. Also, Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to cut energy exports to Germany. And the talk is that Germany is saying it won't let itself be threatened, and that its oil and gas reserves would also help it overcome difficulty, perhaps the winter. But also, the Federation of German Industries, they've warned against a ban on Russian energy. The president saying that the embargo threatens to punish Germany and the EU more severely than the aggressor, in this case, Russia.
Yes, like I've said, I mean, if the first gas pipeline was very successful, which went through Ukraine, as you might know, and there were a lot of challenges with Ukraine and the throughput prices through Ukraine. So the second gas pipeline, which is built but yet to be commissioned, actually went undersea. So there were not going to be any issues that they've had with throughputs through Ukraine. And even that has not been commissioned at the moment. So there's massive investments with gas pipeline, especially to Germany. So Germany, in the interim, has to look for alternatives, probably look to the Middle East and Qatar. But Qatar traditionally sends its gas to Korea and Japan and China. And those involve long-term contracts. So the search for alternative sources of energy for Europe will take a time. And that transition definitely is going to be very costly. So, like I said, all this can be leading to another recession.
Solutions
because all the economies are interdependent.
All right. Solutions by, or rather moves by the IEA and OPEC, to have more oil in more supply. Do you think that will perhaps ease things?
Yes, definitely. I mean, all the OPEC members, including Nigeria, will be expected to increase their production right now. And it's ironic for us in Nigeria because the impact of these oil prices for us are not being felt. So even if OPEC should ask us to increase our output right now, we do not have the capacity because even our quotas that we have right now, we're not meeting our OPEC quotas at the moment. Now, with this chaos in the world with the war, it provides Nigeria an opportunity, but because we do not have the productive capacity, we can't even increase production if we are asked to. So all the other oil-producing countries, like you see, America is reaching out to Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, Saudis, they're going to start increasing their production to be able to meet the shortfall in demand. So basically, a lot of all the OPEC countries will benefit because they will be able to increase their quotas to be able to fulfill that demand. And Saudi Arabia is the biggest oil producer, outside the United States and Russia. And definitely, I think the Saudis can fill the slack. And so they will benefit. But $100 oil, because of our fuel subsidies and the way our economy is structured with our fiscal deficits and fiscal issues, we're unable to take advantage. Because what will happen is that the size of our subsidy in Nigeria is going to go up. So the biggest line items in our budget today is debt repayment and fuel subsidy payments. And the third will be defense. So high oil prices are going to impact Nigeria negatively. So that's just the irony, unfortunately.
And that is sad to hear, that we won't be cashing in on this. But if we move back to some of the other sanctions we're seeing on Russia, and that is big companies leaving the country, this also hurts Russia, doesn't it?
Yes, like I said, Russia is part of the global economy. Their ideology might be different, but the economic philosophy is more or less the same. They're part of the global economy. They're a big supplier of energy to Gazprom, is a big supplier of energy into Western Europe, especially to Germany, which is a powerhouse economy. There's trade between Russia, China, India, and the United States also. So there's interconnectivity, and Russia is part of the global economic order, even though it might have different philosophy or ideology. So it is going to impact Russia. Gazprom, the likes of Gazprom are going to be affected. Aeroflot, the airline, is also going to be affected. So there are issues and there are problems that, we need to deal with. And like I said, the global economy is interconnected and everybody needs to play their card because at the end of the day, the sanctions are not only going to hurt Russia, but the West also is going to have to bear the brunt with high energy prices. That's the consequences of this war.
Also earlier today, a member of the Ukrainian parliament was saying that some of these companies should not only suspend business in Russia, they should not also pay their taxes, they shouldn't send, no cents or fees should also be sent to Russia as well. But looking at the efforts of the decisions of the UK and the US, and then, of course, looking at what the EU is planning to do, and that is a phase out, what do you think might be Russia's response in hurting this decision that it, of course, definitely thinks will hurt Russia back?
Well, like I said, if Russia holds back its gas supply to Western Europe, that's close to $200 billion worth of investment at stake. So it's gonna lose revenues. So if Russia cuts back gas supply to Western Europe, it's going to lose revenue. If there are no gas supplies to Western Europe, then they're going to look for alternative sources, which on the short term will be more expensive. On the long term, they'll eventually find a solution as an alternative to Russia. So if Russia comes back on stream, on the long term, Western Europe will have at least understood that Russia is not reliable. So there's going to be a shift to other countries in terms of looking at that. Is Nigeria ready to be able to pick up the slack? Are we able to ramp up our LNG? We have Train 7 coming up, Train 8. So these are the opportunities that Nigeria could have been taking advantage of. We have more gas in Nigeria than oil reserves. So if we had built capacity, we have another project like the OK LNG that has not been done. If the OK LNG was online, we could begin to meet this demand in Western Europe. So these are the issues because Europe now is going to be looking for alternative sources of energy and energy security. So, like I said, it's a zero-sum game on both sides. So the people putting up the sanctions know that they have to take those losses. All those companies know that on the short term they're going to lose their income from the Russian market. But again, it's a stand and a cost that they're willing to bear. So there's going to be losses definitely on both sides. Yes,
looking at Nigeria and what it has to gain or lose, you're saying if. What do you think are some of the things that we can do, and this is to meet up with, the fallout of all of the sanctions?
Well, what is clearly happening is that we cannot continue to rely only on LNG, the current LNG that we have. Yes, we've made a final investment decision last year on about 7 billion on LNG train 7 or 8, I'm not sure which one that quite is, which is a move in the right direction. But we also have other gas reserves. Nigeria has more gas than oil. And gas is regarded as more of a sustainable energy source and not much of a fossil fuel. So, okay, LNG is there. We need to look at that. Can we relook at that project and maybe sell that to the Europeans right now? That might be a viable aspect. Olokola is there. It's a natural deep sea port. And all the studies for that has been done. It has reached final investment decision, and all of a sudden the project was stalled. So we need to be able to maybe take a look and make that investment. But these investments are long-term investments. This is a project we should have done 15 years ago, but we didn't. So if we had done all these gas projects to be able to tap our gas potentials, we will be benefiting. And that is why you're seeing the LNG going to train 7 or train 8 right now. So we need to look at other sources of our gas and to be able to develop our gas potentials. And this is why we've not made the delay in the petroleum industry bill has meant that we have not put in a lot of investments in that sector. So it's important we take a look at that sector. In 1977, Nigeria was producing 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. Since 1977, we have not hit $2.5 million a barrel. In fact, we're down to $2 million a barrel. And our capacity at 2 million barrels, currently we can't even meet that production. So it shows the lack of investment in our oil and gas industry. We need to step that up, because if we do, it will benefit this country immensely. And when these European countries go through their challenges and the power play of the geopolitics of the global superpowers, Nigeria can benefit, because Nigeria, as a stable West African democratic country, can provide energy security to Western Europe. And, that is how we need to begin to position ourselves. But if we do not make those investments, we can't take advantage of that. And that is why Qatar, as small as a country as it is one of the largest gas producers and suppliers in the world. And the whole of Japan, North Korea, China is dependent on Qatar gas. So, and these are global players, and this is what we need to focus on our geopolitical and economic strategies.
And sadly, in a war such as this, even though Ukrainians are being displaced, some people will be benefiting from what's happening there. But we'd like to thank you, the realities of this invasion. Thank you, CEO, the CFG Advisory Investment Banker and Economist, Mr. Tidewa Adebajo. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Good evening.
In more developments, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that Britain would be doing more in the coming days to protect Ukrainians. The Prime Minister says Britain needs to carry out security checks on Ukrainian refugees after facing calls to relax visa conditions for those fleeing relentless bombardment by invading Russian forces. Unlike many countries elsewhere in Europe that have accepted Ukrainian refugees without visas, Britain has required them, and there has been widespread criticism that this procedure has been too slow and bureaucratic. Britain has granted over 700 visas to Ukrainians since the start of the war. By comparison, Poland, a neighbour of Ukraine, has taken in more than 1.2 million Ukrainians.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Never before has this House listened to an address like the one given yesterday by President Zelensky. And so I want to tell the House that working with our friends and allies across the free world, we will be doing even more in the coming days to protect the people of Ukraine. And, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, will be setting out more details for the House later on. I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right that we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply. The oil companies put their prices up yet higher, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, make it more difficult for them to do what we need them to do, and which I think, by the way, Mr. Speaker, they are doing very responsibly at the moment, and that is divesting from dependence on Russian oil and gas. Is the failed energy.
When we return, Symphony Orchestra plays Ukraine and EU anthems in Kyiv's Maiden Square. UK Defence Minister Ben Wallace says the country is exploring donating anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine to help it defend its skies from Russian invasion. If granted, it will mark a significant step in Britain's support for Ukraine. So far, Ukraine has praised Britain's contribution of thousands of anti-tank missiles, which have helped slow the Russian advance on Kyiv.
In southern Ukraine. As the conflict intensifies, Mr. Speaker, the Russians are changing their tactics, and so the Ukrainians need to too. We can all see the horrific devastation inflicted on civilian areas by Russian artillery and airstrikes, indiscriminate and murderous. It is vital, therefore, that Ukraine maintains its ability to fly and to suppress Russian air attack. To date, the international community has donated over 900 man-portable air defence missiles and thousands of anti-tank guided weapons of varying types, as well as various small arms. But the capability needs strengthening. So in response to Ukrainian requests, the government has taken the decision to explore the donation of Starstreak high-velocity man-portable anti-air missiles. We believe that this system will remain within the definition of defensive weapons, but will allow the Ukrainian force to better defend their skies. We shall also be increasing the supplies of rations, medical equipment and other non-lethal military aid. Their first day objectives. Mr. Speaker, in response to further acts of aggression by Russia, we have now increased that supply. I can update the House that as of today, we have delivered 3,615 NLAWs and continue to deliver more. We will shortly be starting the delivery of small consignment of anti-tank Javelin missiles as well. I want to assure the House that everything we do is bound by the decision to supply defensive systems and are calibrated not to escalate to a strategic level. The initial supply...
Concert of Peace. The Kyiv Classic Symphony Orchestra has performed Ukraine's national anthem and the European Union anthem, among other famous Ukrainian musical pieces, in the Ukrainian capital's Maiden Square. Musicians who remained in the Ukrainian capital since the Russian invasion began nearly 2 weeks ago gathered in central Kyiv to perform an open-air concert led by conductor Herman Makarenko. The concert was broadcast live on Ukrainian television channels and carried the message of free sky to support Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's call to Western countries to protect Ukraine's sky from Russian aggression.
Понад усе! Понад усе! Понад усе!
This concert is action of peace. More important thing of modern humanity. And this concert, we would like to support our president, Vladimir Zelensky, who call and will call to all governments of the world, stop the war in Ukraine. And I ask musicians, will you please, who would like to play concert for peace, please, welcome. You saw 20 musicians. Our orchestra is big orchestra, 65, 70 persons, musicians. But now in Kiev are only 20 musicians.
And in the wake of Russia's invasion last week, Ukraine established a foreign international legion for volunteers from abroad, with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky publicly urging foreigners to fight side by side with Ukrainians against the Russians in order to show support for his country. Well, many people, fighters, have heeded that call. President Zelensky says over 16,000 foreigners have answered. Some of the foreign fighters in Ukraine say they were attracted by the cause to halt an unprovoked attack they view as a once-in-a-generation showdown between the forces of democracy and dictatorship.
Where are you from?
I was over in Iraq, and I was there for a few months, and then flew home, saw my missing kids, hadn't seen them for a while, and basically said, I'm going to Ukraine. So big shock, and I feel a bit sorry for them, to be fair. I know they were pretty upset, but people need me here.
And basically we're here because of the war crimes that are being committed. Obviously the president asked if he can help, and I started to think about it, and then I started to read the war crimes, and that's when it gets sickening.
I told all my family, they were obviously worried but supportive, but anyone that's doubted where I'm going, like why I'm going, I've been setting my mind of why I'm going, and I know it's a just cause.
They're not happy, to say the least. Definitely not happy, but they're proud. I'll say that they are proud, but they are not happy.
I brought some first aid supplies, and so if there's triage needed or evacuation efforts I can help out with, that's what I'm going to do. And essentially right next to the train station is a Red Cross center, so that's where I'm going to put my efforts. And as far as how I feel, I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest, but at the same time, like, it's not about me, it's about the people that are suffering there. So coming out, when you see the images, you see the people that are here right now, you understand that you're not suffering, this is more about them. That's it.
The situation in Ukraine is apocalyptic. The ICRC has warned, especially in besieged cities such as Mariupol, where hundreds of thousands of people are trapped and running out of essential supplies. The bottom line today is that this situation is really apocalyptic for people, and it's getting worse. They're running out of essential supplies, and so our call is really for life-saving aid to reach these people. This is from the International Committee of the Red Cross spokesperson who told a UN news briefing in Geneva. The United Nations Human Rights Office spokeswoman Elizabeth Russell said that her office had verified 1,207 civilian casualties in Ukraine, including 406 killed and 801 injured since Russia's invasion began the 24th of February.
We are desperately trying to facilitate the dialogue between the parties to enable sustained humanitarian access into a city like Mariupol and elsewhere. We stand ready to act in terms of our neutral intermediary role to facilitate the safe passage of civilians out of the city. But the bottom line today is that this situation is really apocalyptic for people. It is getting worse. They are running out of essential supplies. And so our call today is really for life-saving aid to reach these people.
We have recorded at least 1,207 civilian casualties since the latest armed conflict began on the 24th of February, including 406 people killed and 801 injured. However, of course, we believe the actual figures are likely to be much higher as ongoing hostilities have hindered our ability to verify possible cases in many parts of the country. Most of the civilian casualties are from airstrikes and explosive weapons used by Russian forces with wide area effects, including heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. As a result, hundreds of residential buildings in many cities, including Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, Mariupol, and Kiev, have been damaged and destroyed.
More than 2 million people have fled Ukraine to neighboring states as a result of the ongoing war in that country. Among them are 103,000 third country nationals from dozens of countries. Obviously, the situation is very fluid and the numbers are changing on an hourly basis.
And just before we go, a recap of the latest developments today. Russia has agreed a new 12-hour ceasefire to allow civilians flee 6 of the worst affected areas in Ukraine. Civilians are again leaving the northeastern city of Sumy. According to its mayor, some 7,000 people were evacuated from the city on Tuesday. Also, a convoy of evacuees has left the southern city of Enohoda, and buses are being sent to towns around the capital, Kyiv. But Ukraine says continued Russian shelling has again stopped residents leaving the besieged city of Mariupol, as well as Izium near Kharkiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reiterated a call for Kyiv's allies to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, warning of a potential humanitarian catastrophe without such a measure. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace says the UK is increasing its supply of weapons to Ukraine, and Kyiv is calling for an immediate ceasefire around the defunct Chernobyl nuclear power plant amid a power cut at the site. And that is our program at this time. Thank you for watching. It comes your way again 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.